Good afternoon, the few friends we have here in this room. Actually, the three of us are quite disappointed, not just with the crowd that's turned up for this, but also because there was originally a gentleman on the panel. And he chickened out for, I don't know for what reason, perhaps I'm being a bit too judgmental in saying chickened out. Maybe, but amounts to the same thing. We would have liked to have some male representation on this panel, because traditionally the fight between the sexes is what is today, even today unfortunately in India, understood as gender imbalance or gender bias. And 40 years ago what Gloria Steinem may have said in the West really doesn't apply to what is culturally appropriate to this country. Unfortunately, we still look at anything to do with women, whether it's empowerment, sensitivity, neutralization, whatever. Neutrality, not neutralization, though that's what many people may want to do to gender. Traditionally, we continue to look at it as a battle between the sexes, which it is not. The fact is that we are about 48% of the population in this country, and increasingly women have started coming out from behind the traditional barriers of home and hearth and participating in the economic development and the economics of this country. Last year when I was here at the conclave, I was a speaker, and I made a point that I think today has been accepted more or less, that women no longer are merely objects of corporate social responsibility. Women actually already contribute in a very large part to the GDP of this country, especially as unorganized labor. As in many other countries in the world, about 70 to 80% of unorganized labor are women in India, whether it's in the plantations, whether it's in agriculture, whether it's in other unorganized sectors, including where things like knitting, etc. The knitwear industry in Tirupur, it's managed, I mean the workers are mainly women, and it's an unorganized sector. But we still are not considered as proactively involved in the Indian economy. Politically, of course, we aren't. Even today, there's about 30% of MPs in parliament, though at the panchayat level, I'm glad to tell you all that we are today 53% of panchayat women leaders in this country, and that's actually a matter of concern for men. Also, I'm told there are many discussions held about this, but the fact remains that over and above 50%, there are 3% more of panchayat leaders in this country out of 100%. Now, I have two experts sitting on two sides of me, so I'm not going to go into the definitions of gender neutrality and sensitivity. But gender neutrality is generally something that we look at in terms of policy, where it is expected that policy takes into account perhaps what gender sensitivity is, but also does not discriminate between men and women. How far this will be successful in gender empowerment in this country, I don't know. Gender sensitivity is being sensitive to the special needs of both genders. Actually, today we have the androgynous gender also, which is, we are talking about the LGBT community, specifically what we call hinjdas, or we call them, what do we call them? Transgenders, yes, right, we call them transgenders. And in parts of India, they are now actually accepted as a third gender. So gender sensitivity is taking into account all of this, but taking into account doesn't mean that you discriminate against one or the other. Gender sensitivity is also looking at, well, the language used. For example, nowadays we don't say actress, we say actor for everybody. I'm no longer the chairwoman, I'm the chairperson, though men are called chairmen still. But the fact is that without addressing gender concerns, the push that whether it's Prime Minister Modi or his cabinet or all of us want today, and the desire that we have to see that India becomes, at least if not at the head, at the top of the Committee of Nations internationally, it's just not going to happen if we don't address gender concerns. Personally, I feel that no two human beings are ever born equal. So I don't know what this talk of equality is. Men and women are different, But what we are actually asking for today are equal rights, equal opportunity, equal access. And this is where gender neutrality becomes important, that we be given the right to fight on an even keel. At the moment, as you all know, I don't think I need to go into the details of, the fact that we're killed before we are born, that nutrition is, never really given to us. In most still, the majority of women lack access to nutrition, to education, to sanitation, many, many things. And therefore, their potential, or what could be their potential, is severely limited. Therefore, I leave it to both Veena ji and Professor here to give their opinions, and then I'll sum up at the end. Thank you. Yeah.
Good afternoon and namaskar to all. I knew that Lakshmi yours, and I could see the audience drifting in that direction. Then I found some of us went and convinced some or persuaded some of my men friends here to come and join us. So thank you. Equality, I think we are in an age and time where we don't really have to talk about equality. I think it's not something that I would strive for. It's a balance that is needed. If this planet has to survive, has to maintain that balance, I think there has to be an equitable distribution of opportunities, power, everything under the sun. I think it needs to be equally distributed. Only then there could be a balance. Having said that, I must thank my audience here. I only wish I cannot but help make one more comment, and that is that perhaps gender should be part of the main agenda of the session Ideas Conclave, because I think when we talk about gender gap or gender equality, I think the men friends need to be here, because we are talking about the other half, not the better half, but the other half, because either of them could be the better half. I remember Margaret Lawrence, a Canadian woman writer, had once said something that resonated so well with me. She said, when a woman fights for equality, one must remember what one is fighting and who one is fighting with. These are our brothers, the father, the husband, probably the fraternity around. So we need to be careful. It did resonate with me, but then I asked her, why do we need to fight to begin with? Is there a need to do that? There should not be any fight. I think it's very important that we move forward in equal measure. Now, what I've done is I'm just trying to posit on 3 issues and trying to throw ideas, and then perhaps we can have a discussion, if you so please. The Gender Gap Index 2014 puts India at 101 out of 136 countries. Now, the statistics, we all know, helps us to understand where we are and where we actually need to be, When I looked at the statistics, somehow it's not convincing. Probably the statistics that they have, because I know that women increasingly are working around the country. If you go to the rural area, 89.96% of women work in rural areas. And if you look at other segments of the urban areas, I think women are doing well. They're not bad, I should say. They're already getting there. So perhaps we need to take another look at how they assess, or how we need to present our own statistical data to them, or probably we need to assess our statistical data. Now, that's one thing. The other is that, as I said earlier, equality today is a necessity. It is not something that we need to strive for, because if we want the world to have a sustainable growth model, then it's very important that women and men are not boxed into different roles. That could be harmful for the growth of the nation. Now, balance is necessary, and therefore, what is fundamental to women's equality or growth is perhaps that they are able to participate fully in development process, in inclusive growth of the nation. And how does one ensure this? Now, this can be ensured when the government starts taking another look or reinventing the model of gender growth and progress. Perhaps we need to find alternate measures of assessing where we are and where do we need to go, how do we establish this, particularly keeping in mind the recent incidents which have been in media, in news, of violence, of rape. I think it's very important that we have a course of action in place. Now, the laws are all there, but are we able to enact those laws? You know, the moment you start enacting the law, we have the human rights people, you know, saying that you cannot do that. So how do we establish or enable, you know, having a law in place which can be actually you know, brought into force? So that's something that we need to take another look. Swift, quick action is very, very important. So the laws are already in place, how they need to be you know, actualized, how the speeding the process is very important. So how do we work on this is something that we need to take another look at. Because to me and to all of us sitting here, I think it's very important that the human dignity is established for anyone, whoever that be, girls or women or men. The self-esteem and self-respect are ensured. Now, we need to take a look at perhaps what is required, and I think I will quote the Rig Veda's very first hymn translated into English. And it says, all those who are good doers come together, collectively light the fire of knowledge. Its scale multiplies, eventually resulting in prosperous good life. Now, the emphasis here is on the value of knowledge translating into good, prosperous life. Now, education, therefore, becomes an effective enabler of equity. One way of looking at it is probably this. And to me, there is no other way to move forward, because education is perhaps the key to progress and development. So gender equity can be achieved effectively through education available to all at different sectors. Now, when I say education should be available to all, our Honorable Prime Minister came up with the caption that Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, you know. I would perhaps take another look and add a step to that and say that education at any age, at any stage. Because to give you a case in point here is, in Rajasthan, there was a girl, 15-year-old, you know, who got out of child marriage at the age of 8 and was just at home. At 15, she realized that she must go and get educated. She went to the school. Her parents took her to the school and they refused to admit her. Now, this girl is now going from one village to another in Rajasthan, teaching them how it is very important not to have child marriages in villages and how girls need to be educated. So at 15, she is denied education. This is denial of human dignity as well. So I would look at it as education at any age. At the age of 50, if a woman wants to do a course in law, I think it should be available. You know, we should be able to do that. In US, we do that. In West, we take any course at any age, at any stage in life. I think that needs to be done. The admission processes need to change here as well. So education for girls, women at any age. Now, this would add to entrepreneurship. It would add to employability of women in rural areas, or the urban areas, it's already there. So new policies to be brought in as an icon of hope. I think that is where one needs to take a look at our policies yet again. You know, we have done very well under 12th plan. A lot of new measures were brought in. Now we need to ensure and take a look. You know, there's something called gender auditing. I think that is also being done. Lalita ji will tell us about that. a little, because gender auditing, unless it is done, I don't think we can, effectively evaluate where we seem to be heading. So that's one thing. The other thing that I wanted to look at is, do we need to debunk ourselves, our cultural and civilizational history? Now, if you look at the Rig Veda, and I'm going to quote that again, the wife and the husband, being the equal halves of our substance, are equal in every respect. Therefore, both should join and take equal parts in all works, religious and secular, unquote. Now, when you look at our Vedic times or Upanishads, we have series of examples of how women were achievers at that point of time. They were knowledge leaders as well. You had Gargi writing the hymns. Some of the hymns in Rig Veda were written by her. We had the philosopher Ghosha, the woman philosopher, probably I should say that, Ghosha, and then Maitreyi. What is interesting about Maitreyi was known for her intellectual caliber, but what is significant is that she rejected half of her husband's wealth. Her husband is Yajnavalkya, as we know, in favor of knowledge. She said, I don't want money, I don't want wealth, I would rather seek knowledge. And I think at that point of time, to say that, it's a big thing. I think we need to take another look at our culture, at our cultural history probably, because we have traveled from the Upanishadic times to the medieval, the medieval and the modern times, and we've gone through some very dark times where women are concerned, because if we have done exceedingly well at the Rigvedic time, we have just sort of scaled down there, and then now is the time to scale up, I thought. And we need to take a look at what is it that we have lost in these years, what is it that we need to reclaim. And as we move forward in cultural history, we have a lot of pockets of times where women have done exceedingly well. If you take the Bhakti movement, I'm just going to give one or two examples here, whether it is Mirabai or Janabai or Lal Ded, or whether you take Akka Mahadevi from South, all of them questioned the oppression. They openly advocated social justice and equality. They found their own ways to do it, but they have done it, and they succeeded. They stood out. They set an example at that point of time. Or we move away from, I'm not going to mention Jhansi Ki Rani or examples that we are already aware of, but some examples from Karnataka, particularly Kittur Chennamma, queen of the state of Kittur in Karnataka. She led an armed rebellion against the British. Not a highly educated woman, but she could do that. She could show her leadership there. Or Abbakka Rani, again a queen of coastal Karnataka, led the defense against the European armies. Now that was again something that one would look at how women have been able to move forward. Whether you take the state of Karnataka, whether you go up to the Rajasthan, or you go up to north, it's all there. So you find that women, if given an opportunity, they do prove their ability. So therefore, as we move forward in this terrain, I thought it is important to look at how women feel today. How does it feel for one to do well? I was just thinking about this, for women who do well. I had a university which is seen as a very problematic university. I went there about 2-3 years ago, and seems to be fine now. Many people come and ask me almost every 6 months, oh, you're still here, we thought you would be leaving. It's not possible, because the 2 men earlier failed. So how can a woman succeed? So there's always a question mark, when a woman does well. Can she do well? Is it possible? The questions. And I always, what does being a woman have to do with being a good administrator or excelling in any area? Why do you think that gender is an impediment in excellence? I don't think so. Most women can achieve and are achievers despite being women. in whatever countries, despite not being given opportunities. I think it's important that we look at ourselves from a different lens, because today I think, be it the banking industry, the corporate world, or the new entrepreneurship that is emerging, I think women are doing exceedingly well. And I think that is where India needs to encourage women. The other thing that I wanted to just leave you with is the idea of how women still need to have the need to step up. Despite all this, there is still a need to step up. They need to be pushed. They need a godfather somewhere to pull them up. I think that is something that is against self-respect or one's self-esteem. And that's also a kind of patronizing attitude that you find can be problematic, because that's not how women would like to succeed. If they do succeed, if given an opportunity, they do well. So how do we do that to our daughters, to our children, to our siblings? I think all of us, the men in particular, and women in, perhaps I would be more particular where women are concerned, because every time I see there's a gender gap, there is a problem, I blame the woman more than the man. Because you find that the mother somewhere has not stood up and has not given that self-esteem to the girl child. I think that's very important. So as families, what we can achieve for our children is something that we need to think about very carefully. It was P.D. James who had said, what a child does not receive, he or she can seldom give back. So in this age, in this society, if we do expect human values to do well and people to succeed, for societies to emerge as good, sustainable societies, economies that are doing well, I think the equal partners have to be treated equally. Only then, we can move forward. Thank you.
You don't want me to announce it? Okay, Professor Sikri will now give her her talk.
Thank you, Lalita ji, Professor Naina Singh, dear members of the audience. It's great to see some of an audience here. I must thank India Ideas Conclave and India Foundation for inviting me here. But I must register a strong protest against the manner in which the issue of gender has been discussed in this conference. I think it's completely incorrect to give this very condescending approach of gender equality, gender sensitivity, gender neutrality. And then in the other panel, which is being held parallel with this, you talk about in search of Lakshmi, Indic economics and so on. I think that it should have been, these two are both sides of the same coin. Either there should have been just one plenary session on the whole issue of gender and the economy, or in any case, people should have should not be looking at the gender issues in this kind of a sidelined way. Anyway, I am going to actually present the issue in a certain different context, because somebody would wonder, well, why am I speaking on gender issues and so on? Having spent many years as a career diplomat, Ambassador Mohammad Zamir was my very valuable colleague in Bangladesh when I was there. I have fought my own share of battles in the bureaucratic circles, in diplomacy, to get equality for women. That was one thing. But yeah, and also on the tennis court, yes. But when I was posted, particularly in South Asia, I was as High Commissioner in Bangladesh, and then I was earlier in Nepal as well. I've participated in many SAARC summits as well. One thing strikes you tremendously, that South Asian women are individually very strong. So there can be no doubt about their capacity. We have across South Asia women who've been presidents and prime ministers. You have Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, tremendous examples. And now, of course, Myanmar as well, with Aung San Suu Kyi's party having achieved this great historic majority. But as a community, as a society, women of South Asia are heavily discriminated against. Now, I think the statistics may well show that, yes, 89% of women in rural India work. But the problem problem is that what they do is not included in the GDP. They are the invisible women. In fact, there was a study done in Bangladesh, I think Shaheen Anam of the Manushya Journal Foundation had done that, where they had actually said that if you include women's economic contribution in the GDP, your GDP can go up by as much as 2%. In agricultural sector, 17 of the 20 odd agricultural activities that go in from sowing to harvesting, 17 out of 20 are done by women. But what they do is not put in the GDP. It's not calculated. It's outside the economic calculation of GDP. So I think these are the issues, and that is why I was talking that the need to combine the search for Lakshmi with the question of gender equality, gender neutrality, and gender sensitivity. We don't want any donation. We don't want any CSR. We don't want men to look down their nose and say, oh yeah, sorry guys, take this. No. First thing to be done when you look at gender issues is to bring men on board to empower the women. Without men coming on board, there is no empowerment for women. Let's recognize it. It's not us versus them. That is the first myth that we must demolish. That is why I object to the structure of this panel. It's a question of us versus them. Gender equality, gender neutrality, gender sensitivity, okay, we'll talk about it. No, you guys have to come on board and recognize that why are we asking for it? Because without gender equality, without gender sensitivity, there can be no economic development. Let me be very clear on this, and I would like to point to two very specific reports which have highlighted this very important fact. There is the World Economic Forum in Geneva. Every year they bring out the Global Gender Gap Report. Sunaina mentioned it also. But I don't know whether you understand what the Global Gender Gap Report means. The Global Gender Gap Report of the World Economic Forum is that what is the difference in access to resources between men and women. It's not whether you're rich or poor. In fact, there are countries in Africa, I think Malawi is one of them, there's some others, where the country may be very poor, but they're very high in the Global Gender Gap Report because whatever is there in society is equally divided between men and women. Men and women have equal access to that. But India and most of the countries of South Asia, in fact, Bangladesh has been going up in that Global Gender Gap Report. India has been, well, at the same level or marginally going down. In South Asia, the gap between access to resources between men and women is huge. Access to financial resources, access to health and survival issues, access to education, access to participation in economic opportunity and political opportunity. There's only one issue in South Asia, which is political economic opportunity, because we've had so many presidents and prime ministers as women, as I just mentioned. So in that, South Asia is doing well. All the others, we are abysmal, in fact, as far as access to resources is concerned. So this is the gender equality we are talking about. Make access to resources equal. Make women, ownership of land for women, opening a bank account for women. All these is what the Global Gender Gap Report is. The second report that I'd like to talk about is the Gender Empowerment Report of the World Bank that came out some 2 or 3 years ago, which actually first postulated the fact that gender equality is smart economics. You want to develop, bring women on board. Now, it's okay, you can say that 89% of women may be working in the rural areas. Of course they work from day to night. But not only are they not being put in the GDP, but what return are they getting for what they're doing? They're getting no return, they're getting no empowerment. Is their position within the family improving? Are they getting more access to education? And this is what the World Bank report of 2012 or 13 spoke about. Much more recently, September 2015, just at the time when the UN adopted the new Sustainable Development Goals for the world, that time McKinsey brought out a similar report. I think the fact of the UN adopting the Sustainable Development Goals is very significant because now this is an international commitment. Now you may say, okay, Sustainable Development Goals for all of society. No, but if you look at the detail of the Sustainable Development Goals, not only is there a separate standalone goal for women titled Achieve Gender Equality and Empower All Women and Girls. This is goal number 5. This is a huge advance on the earlier MGDs, which was which was very, very vague on women's rights. Goal 5 of the new SDGs is fairly comprehensive. It calls for an end to all forms of discrimination against women and girls, including elimination of discriminatory laws, policies, and practices, and adoption of policies and legislation to promote gender equality. So it's a proactive activity that is being called for. But in addition to Goal 5, gender equality objectives have also contained a number of other goals. So it has been recognized as a cross-cutting priority across other activities, virtually saying that even in other activities, if you want to achieve economic development and achieve those activities, then gender equality is very important. Now, the first goal is ending poverty. Now, this goal has gender equality as a huge priority. You cannot end poverty, and here again I recall what the other people must be discussing in the other room searching for Lakshmi, that you cannot end poverty unless you end hunger, unless you achieve food security, unless you improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. Now, in all of these, ending hunger, achieving food security, improving nutrition, promoting sustainable agriculture, you must have women-centric patterns of development. You must have women-centric policies because women are the center. Why are children malnutritioned? Children are malnutritioned because their mothers went hungry when their mothers were expecting the babies. The World Health Organization has said that, all right, maybe countries like India and all of South Asia have a positive demographic profile, a high young population which can achieve a lot for the economy. But the World Health Organization has also said that the ability of the children of South Asia to contribute to the economy depends on the access to nutrition and good feeding from the time of conception to the first 2 years. So the first 1,000 days of a child's life, from point of conception to 2 years, those first 1,000 days determine your ability to be physically and mentally equipped to contribute to the economy. And these first 1,000 days of a child's life is where the mother is suffering from hunger because she's the last to eat in the family. She eats leftovers. It doesn't matter whether she's expecting. It doesn't matter whether she's feeding a child. She only has access to that because of so-called social practices. She has to feed the rest of the family before she does anything. She has to cook and then feed the rest of the family. So I think this is where a women-centric policy of development is necessary for the economy. Make women the center of your ending malnutrition campaign. Now, and this is the most important. Goal 2, promoting sustainable agriculture. Women, as I said, are working almost exclusively in 17 out of 20 agricultural activities. So make women-centric policies for improving agriculture. I was just talking today, I was saying that, look, we talk about, the effect of the drought and poor rain, but in urban areas, every urban entity in India has adopted rainwater harvesting as a mantra. And if you want to build a new house, you're told rainwater harvesting is compulsory. Have you done it for rural areas? In rural areas, people are still depending on the rain gods for access of water. And no rainwater harvesting facilities have been seriously introduced in rural areas. There was some, legislation or government rules, executive orders passed a few years ago, but absolutely unimplemented. So again, for sustainable agriculture, Goal 2, you have to make women-centric policies. And this is actually mentioned also in Goal 2. Health and well-being, Goal 3, again, women have been mentioned in a big way. And in Goal 4 on education, making a women-centric policy for access to education is absolutely crucial for doing that. Employment and decent work, Goal 8. But women are working. They have no organized sector. Most of the women are working in the unorganized sector. Decent work. Poor wages, no confirmed contracts, nothing at all. And they are just working at the benefit of the employer who wants cheap labor without any kind of decent work facilities. And this is what is happening. So in all these issues, actually, now it's international obligation because we have all subscribed to that UN Sustainable Development Goals resolution. We have to work for this issue of women-centric patterns of development. And this actually is what is the major objective of my organization after I left the government, development, I have started an organization called the South Asia Women's Network, SWAN, which has 9 countries from Afghanistan to Myanmar. And we actually have been working on these very sustainable development goals for the women of South Asia. SWAN has been a member of a very dynamic women's Google group, which has been a major contributor to bring focus on women-centric patterns of development and goals to be adopted. And in our SWAN, we have actually, 2 years ago, we adopted a roadmap for sustainable development for the women of South Asia. And we work on 3 aspects. We work on advocacy, we work on leadership development among women, and then we work on capacity building for implementing this thing at all levels. And if you will, the amazing part about what I spoke about, the McKinsey report, which was issued at the same time as the Sustainable Development Goals, that tells you about South Asia. They have spoken about the new GPS, Gender Parity Score. That's a new GPS. And you will be ashamed to know that South Asia is the lowest in the world in terms of this gender parity score. South Asia is lower than the Middle East in terms of gender parity score. South Asia is lower than North Africa in terms of gender parity score. We are lower than Sub-Saharan Africa in terms of gender parity score. We are lower than China. We are lower than Southeast Asia. And of course, we are lower than the rest of the Western developed world. So this is a matter of great shame. We talk about, we're looking for Lakshmi, we're looking for strength, we're looking for Shakti, we're looking for, all Saraswati. But what happens in our daily lives? Are we giving it to our daughters? Are we enabling the daughters of our rural sisters to come up in the world by giving them access to education? It is really a shame that India, South Asia, which today morning, yesterday when the Prime Minister of Bhutan spoke, and he asked which is the oldest civilization, which is the best civilization. Okay, fine, the Indian civilization. But what are we doing? We have evolved or devolved to a state where we are the lowest in the world in terms of gender parity. So I think this is really a wake-up call. And it's a wake-up call not only in terms of human rights, which is of course the issue of gender equality, but it's a wake-up call in terms of development. We ourselves cannot develop. We ourselves cannot hope to achieve, whether it is status of a superpower or status of the decision-making forums of the world. We cannot achieve it if you have left out close to 50% of your population. So I think that we must, the McKinsey report also mentions another startling figure. It says that no matter that there's a very large proportion of women working in some way or the other, but the share of GDP generated by women in India is only 17%. And that India's GDP could see a jump of about 60% by 2025 if we brought women in as equal partners in development, at equal partners in working, equal pay for equal work, equal access to jobs, equal access to education. And the McKinsey report also has another category, which is the rest of South Asia, and where they say that if you brought women in, it would contribute to a 48% jump in GDP by 2025. Of course, I don't know whether 2025 is very much around the corner, 10 years from now, but would we be able to do it? Would we be able to do it? And we in SWAN, in my South Asia Women's Network, this is our premise, that the central focus, our vision, mission, and strategy calls for achieving sustainable development for South Asia through an integrated approach incorporating the centrality of women's agency, voice, participation, and leadership in all aspects of development. So I think that we should, in fact, look at it very carefully, sector by sector, to see in what way we can achieve the centrality of women's agency, voice, participation, and leadership in all sectors of development. And I'd be very happy to answer questions on that. Thank you.
So you've heard the views of both Professor Sunaina Singh and Veena Sikri. There are a couple of points that I want to make along with the summing up. The need for education and equity is, of course, in order to foster equity, of course, everybody understands and I think agrees with what Professor Sunaina said. And she's right, that without education, you can't increase employability, you can't increase income generation, and you also can't increase participation in decision making, which is what most women lack in South Asia, throughout the world. You know, civilizationally, historically and culturally, especially in the Vedic, the early Vedic period, women were considered equals. There was no real distinction between the roles or the typically gendered roles that are played out today in our society. Women stay at home, women look after children, men go out and work, earn the bread and come back. Automatically, the people who are more involved in income generation almost take precedence in decision making, both politically and economically, and these two are intertwined, as you know. But over the years, over the last couple of millennia, we have seen that both religion and culture have steadily become more and more unfair towards women. And this is not just in India or South Asia, this is throughout the world. The more advanced civilizations throughout history, wherever they may be, regardless of what religion those people may have been practicing, you have seen that women have been given an equal opportunity to come up, to shine, to participate, etc. Ironically, it's not merely men, as is often discussed, who are at fault for the lagging behind of women. Often enough, it's women. Whether they are mothers, whether they are sisters, whether they are co-workers, we don't stand up for ourselves, we accept a lot of things, and this is a sort of culture that has been thrust on us, that women adjust, women compromise, women are softer, women etc., etc. I think now increasingly it's being proved untrue, especially if you see the three of us on the stage, you won't believe it. And many women who were there as part of the conference, of this conclave. In India, we have had a history of reformers, Swami Vivekananda, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Rabindranath Tagore, many people. Down south, Tirukkural, the man who wrote Tirukkural. I mean, there are enormous amount of men who have been proponents actually for women's empowerment. And they talked more about women's participation than merely empowerment. As you know, we've had a lot of social and cultural norms which have suppressed women. But increasingly, people are realizing, even in the depths of some of what are considered the most backward states of India, the Bimaru states, that education is the single most important and the first primary tool for any society to be advanced. No longer is education of women merely being looked at as a proponent or an accelerator for women's empowerment, but actually for the country's development, as Professor Sikri has pointed out. There was one thing that was left out. Not only is education equally important, we have to talk about the skilling of women also. The entire Skilling India program will be a success only if we are able to successfully skill our women. Similarly, the sanitation program. Unless sanitation, access to sanitation actually reaches women in the ideally the most far-flung parts of our country, I don't think it's going to be a success. And there are several other programs which today are being pushed by the central government and many state governments, unfortunately not all, but unless, as I say, that the concept and the practice of equal access to both men and women, regardless of regardless of anything else, whether it's religious or cultural or social differences, is pushed and is actively practiced, we are not going to be able to reach the heights that we want our country to reach. And one thing I have to admit that has to be done is the sensitivity of those who are in positions of power, especially politicians, policemen, the bureaucracy, the defense services, etc. They have to be made more, and that is, they really lack sometimes even gender sensitivity. I deal on a daily basis with the police and with bureaucracy and with politicians, and it's a very depressing job sometimes. Even today, and I'm forced to admit it, though perhaps, I mean, those of you present in this room may not belong to that subsection of the population, but we are extremely insensitive today in India towards gender. So sensitivity is something that I think we have not paid enough attention to today afternoon, but the three of us are very irritated about the way the session was held. So I hope you will excuse us about that. But sensitivity has also to be sort of taught almost. And part of what the National Commission of Women is doing now is actually holding classes for orientation and sensitivity with not just the police. And, but we are even talking to students, which is what, because as we have this huge demographic advantage, we thought that the younger we start, the earlier we will be able to push the concept of gender equity. And as of now, it's really more a concept than practice. You know, the women you see in this room are not the normal women of India. We are probably about less than 5% of what make up the actual women in India. More than 90% of women in this India are still uneducated, illiterate, not just uneducated, they're illiterate with lack of access to nutrition, lack of access to sanitation, lack of access to finance. They've started to come out and vote. And I keep saying that the day male politicians and bureaucrats and policemen, etc., start understanding the power of the woman's vote, then perhaps the idea of just equity, we don't need to argue so hard and so vociferously for it anymore. I must thank the India Foundation for giving us this opportunity, even though we're not happy with actually, you know, the way it's been given to us. And I'd like to make a request that in the next conclave, gender issues become a part of the general debate. Unless that happens, we are really just, you know, talking to a concrete wall almost. I'm not saying yellow concrete walls, but the fact is that unless it is mainstreamed, gender is going to always be a problem in our country, and that's not good for the future of India. Thank you. The floor is open for about 5 minutes of questions because Veena and I have a flight to catch back to Delhi today evening. But comments and questions, I just request you to keep it as short as possible, that's all. Yes. Can you give them, yeah.
I just would like to say that gender budgeting is one of the policy dimensions, and in every scheme, the gender budgeting dimension needs to be part of it. I mean, this is just a kind of an observation, whether it is state government or government of India and all. And hence, whether it is Skill India or whatever programs and all that, like Startup India or Digital India or whatever, gender dimension needs to be part of it.
Skill India has got a huge gender budget.
Every scheme, ma'am.
But I agree, every scheme, but unfortunately the irony is that last year, or this year's budget,
yes,
the budget that was cut the most was the Women and Child Development Ministry's budget.
One passing remark, in addition to the three valiant women here, if one more man also is there, it would have been more balanced.
Yes, there was, but as I said at the beginning, I think you were not here at the beginning of it, I think he got scared or he ran away or he ducked or whatever what one wants to use.
If I may, I would just like to, I like that because gender budgeting I think is one of the most important criteria for any development plans for the gender. I think gender auditing and gender budgeting should be part across the board.
Yeah, the NCW has started, we've gotten independent consultants to start gender auditing of the central government program, so we're going to be in trouble soon. Yeah,
Ma'am,
yes.
I have one observation to make. That madam was worrying that all the Lakshmi was there. Don't worry, Saraswati is here. And Lakshmi has to follow Saraswati. There is no doubt about it. And there are many things that men can never do like a woman. I can confidently say I am running an industry. Even running an industry, a sick industry, also a woman can do, not a man can do. So there are many things we are much more than men. So let us not say, if we say gender sensitization, I feel you are talking about women. The sensitization should be for men, not for women. Because
no, sensitizing men towards women.
No, not present. The sensitivity should be there. Now, what happens if the women are working, men are taking it easy? They are enjoying their salary, whereas women are spending the money on their children and the food. So that's happening at many places. If a woman goes to work, all the money comes home into children's mouth.
Yes, comes generally to the
men
family.
And another thing, the most injustice is being done by our governments by regular supply of alcohol in every street corner. Why do you want to how can women live when the men come home drinking? Totally drunk.
My own state, we have actually state-run liquor shops. They're called TASMAC.
And one more point, ma'am, I want to tell. South is not as bad as North. In South, women are empowered. Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Andhra
Relatively
Pradesh,
empowered. I'm
Maharashtra,
from the South.
and all these.
Relatively.
Maybe you belong, but you might not have observed. I was in Rajasthan, every place I was there. The women in South are
Ma'am,
much
we are
more
running short of
empowered.
time.
So we are not that bad.
Women in South are more educated, so relatively, yes, awareness is higher, but it's only a relative empowerment. The lady right in front?
Sorry.
No, fine.
No, I just wanted to mention that I've been listening with great care. Now, just next door to Delhi, of course, is Dhaka. And we have had a lady as Prime Minister for the last 24 years in different capacities, different parties. Today, now, the Prime Minister is a lady, the Speaker is a lady, the Deputy Leader of the House is a lady, the Leader of the Opposition is a lady. It's a good thing, but that's why sometimes they are talking in Dhaka of gender empowerment. They want the men to move forward. But,
we look forward to that moment in India.
But may I share these three important issues which probably Veena might have mentioned. One is that because there has been empowerment of women in Bangladesh in a very large manner, in two ways. One, the present Prime Minister has taken it as an initiative. All girls from the age of 4, when they start primary school, all the way till they end their matriculation, their education is free. Later on in college, it is still free. But for boys, they have to pay. Now, the second thing is that in addition to all of this, she has encouraged that women should participate in UN peacekeeping operations from the armed forces and police. So we now have nearly almost 2,000 women in different capacities in various areas of UN peacekeeping all over the world. The third thing is what we have found out to our great surprise, but it's worked very well. When you empower a woman and you make her able to take decisions, or take part in decisions, that has reduced her fertility rate in family planning. And it has come down, so as you know, in the Millennium Development Goals, we were ahead of India in most of the socio-economic sectors. We did better. And the last element was that today there are more women who are literate functionally in Bangladesh than any other country in the South Asian area. We are more functionally literate women there. And this is something which we are hoping will be seen as an example for the rest of the country and the rest of the people in South Asia. Thank you.
There were lots of hands up that side.
South Asia from Bangladesh also participated.
In solidarity. Actually, Professor Upendra Bakshi, when he was Vice Chancellor, he was also professor at law school. He used to say that, as you mentioned, before we used to call chairman for a person who chairs the panel. Now, but then you said the chairperson is neutral. But he used to say, still it's per son, it's not per daughter. Still, you're not away from the gender bias. So he used to say, perhaps we should say hue per. So there's neither son or man there, So I think you can't escape from gender biases, even in per son as such. Continuing on what the former Foreign Secretary just said, you mentioned that South Asia has the lowest gender parity. Yes. But it's odd because South Asia has not just Bangladesh, but Pakistan also had a woman prime minister. India had woman prime minister until recently, a very powerful woman. And Sri Lanka had woman prime minister. Aung San Suu Kyi is just elected. And then also Nepal also has just a woman president. How come you have the woman as the head of the government or the state, the most powerful person in these countries, yet the gender parity is lowest in the whole world?
Simple, it's not just men who promote patriarchy, so do women. Give it to, about 2 more questions can be taken.
Yeah, I'm Gauri Sareen and I'm working in the space of women leadership. Right from the corporate entrepreneurship space to the social and political space. Very interesting comments which I found regarding Bangladesh, and this wonderful comment on if we've had, especially in this region, so many women leaders, and I'm specific to India because Bangladesh seems to be a case in point. How come we still have an issue of gender parity? And I think you answered it briefly, which is patriarchy also drives women. Yeah, absolutely. So my question really is that what is it which we have in terms of our agenda, we as women who are in the space of leadership, to actually take this whole roadmap of thinking or thought leadership on how women leaders should contribute in this space? I do not see enough of that happening. When a woman enters into the space of leadership, she speaks about all the possible issues men do normally. And I've rarely seen women really talking about that these are issues about women which we need to focus on. And I think that is something I'm very sensitive to in the country of India, where I feel strongly that women leadership needs to be really drawn up from the masses in an extremely different way, sensitizing women to begin with. So is there a roadmap for that? In the first, yeah, that's my question. And also in the context, of course, of reservation for women in the parliament, because if you're going to have reservation of 33% or 50% tomorrow, if at all, are we really talking about women participating by bringing in sensitization to women's issues and
Look,
actually...
I'll just answer the political part of it. The rest Veena ji can do, and so can Professor Sunaina do. Politically, we ask for reservation because it is, I mean, we're almost now in an emergency state. If you wait for women to be educated, to be empowered, etc., and then expect them to come up through the political system. Remember, we've had reservation at the panchayat level for some time now. It's only now that we have 53% of panchayat leaders who are women out of the 100%. But you'll almost see almost no cases of panchayat leaders who've gone on to become MLAs and MPs. So we must have reservation as of now. Maybe later we can change our minds, but today we need it because the participation of women in the political process is abysmal. That is why the main reason for us asking for reservation is that. The skilling programs that are coming up are going to probably help women in, part of it is also going to be political skilling. It's not just going to be activity based or employment income generation based. That is very important, but they'll take a few years to come to fruition. That is why immediately, as soon as we can and we can persuade the men from all the parties, and believe me, it doesn't matter what party you belong to, none of them wants reservation. We need to bring in reservation for women in the legislative and the central, in legislatures and in parliament. The rest of it, yes, women also, when you're doing orientation, etc., for gender sensitivity or neutral, gender neutral work, etc., or policy making, women have to be included in it. We're not talking just about men. Today it's accepted that these programs are not addressed or directed only towards the men. For example, when the NCW does its legal training camps, we are not talking to students or only to women. We're talking to men also. We are not talking only to men. We're talking to both. There we are gender neutral. We don't specify how many men, how many women. Everybody is being trained equally. I think.
I'd like to add to that. I think one of the biggest issues, and that is why it's very important for men and women to solve it, it's the patriarchal mindset. You see, it's the patriarchal mindset that has kept women out of development, basically, because the patriarchal mindset decides what women should do, what they should not do, the girl of the house, whether she has education, and so on. So we are talking of a very fundamental change of changing mindsets to empower the women of India and South Asia and all over the world. Now, this has to be a collective effort. You know, in Sri Lanka, there was a survey done, because they have a huge problem of domestic violence and violence against women, including rape and so on. And their survey revealed that much of the violence against women was done by young boys, young comparatively, say from teenagers between 20 and 49 years of age. And the primary reason given by many of these boys was a sense of sexual entitlement. Oh, we can do it. It's our right. We have a sexual right to do this. So this is a mindset that has to change. And I think men and women have to work together. It's not only a women's job. If you talk about mindset, isn't it the mother-in-law who contributes to the mindset as much as the father-in-law? If the mother-in-law accepts a patriarchal mindset, then you have the same problem. So it is a joint effort. It's not us versus them. And I would think the skilling aspect that Lalita ji spoke about so much is very important. And I would like to point out here to one aspect. I think this Manrega, which we've had, it's a rural employment guarantee scheme, but it premises non-skilled. Because the very first sentence of the Manrega Act talks about unskilled labor. Now, this entitlement, giving somebody money for being unskilled, actually is a break against skilling. Because if you are skilled, you graduate out of the Manrega. So I think we have to really have a debate on it, that do you want unskilled people in the rural areas, or do you want women to be skilled wherever they are? So these are very key policy issues, and men and women must work on it together.
I think I would like to answer her question. I think that was a very well taken point about the roadmap for leadership. You know, when women do provide leadership, is there a roadmap that's prepared? I think they do. You know, every woman who heads a particular organization does prepare a roadmap. The only problem is that recording of how you go about, what you map for the rest of the women or girls is not recorded properly. I think that is where it is very important to have a research database, you know, created where gender leadership is concerned, you know, where roadmaps are concerned. I think it's very important to have a research directory on this particular aspect.
Just one last point before I say thank you on behalf of all three of us. Women in positions of leadership and decision making need to mentor other women. This is very rare in our country. We really need to mentor other women, and I request, all of you to do it, and if you're not already doing it, and tell every other woman also that you must mentor other women. Thank you to India Foundation for this opportunity, and all of you for being present here. Your numbers have swelled a bit, but Bawri Saab, please, next year we must have a man, and we must have the gender issue mainstreamed into the rest of the thing. Thank you.